The moment I stepped into the drafting room, I knew something was wrong. The air felt charged, thick with deceit. My design, my soul poured onto paper, was now a ghost. I found out the hard way when I sat in that pitch meeting, quiet and hopeful, watching Danielle Hayes, my colleague and trusted friend, present my work as hers. I could hardly breathe, disbelief tightening around my chest. No one noticed the shift in my expression, the horror flooding my veins. They only saw her. I had become invisible. How could they? I whispered to myself, fighting the numbness clouding my mind. But the truth settled in. Not how could they, but they did. The realization cracked me open, exposing a raw wound. Betrayal is quieter than a shout. It seeps into your bones, morphing your trust into a weapon against you. The applause that followed was deafening, a bridge of recognition built on the ashes of my effort. Each clap felt like a stab. I watched Danielle revel in admiration, her smile bright against the backdrop of my silent suffering. I chose not to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I hardened, the steel of my resolve tempered by the ineffable wrongness of the moment. I stopped explaining myself, stopped feeling. I began to document my original designs, my interactions with Danielle. I separated myself from the noise, from the rattling of defenses. My revenge wouldn't be a tempest of emotion, but a meticulously crafted storm that would rise from the silence. The intricacies of her ambition revealed themselves slowly. As I compiled evidence of her betrayals, I smiled quietly. Each piece was not just proof of her deceit, but a testament to my patience. This was my blueprint for justice, a hidden structure designed to expose ruin while I remained the ghost in the drafting room, unseen, yet omnipresent. Time became my accomplice, sharpening my instincts as I worked late into the nights, crafting a new vision for a project that echoed everything Danielle had stolen from me. I wouldn't pull the trigger too soon. Instead, I let it simmer, letting the world unknowingly spin around me. I didn't want her downfall. I craved something purer, my name back in the light, recognized and respected. As I stood there plotting my quiet revenge, I realized the truth. The real power lies in what remains unspoken, in the poise of stillness where chaos threatens to erupt. I would return, and when I did, it would be on my terms. The applause I heard in silence echoed like a distant storm, a chorus lifted in unison to celebrate Danielle. I didn't need to turn on my heels to see her radiant smile, nor did I make excuses to leave the room. I stayed, a silent spectator cloaked in the shadows of my own despair, the bitter taste of injustice settling on my tongue. There she was, accepting an industry award that was, by all measures, mine. My designs, my vision, carried in her voice, sanctified by the claps of an audience that would never know the truth. Each cheer that broke through the heavy air was a poignant reminder of what had been stolen, not just my creation, but the very essence of my worth. I bit down on my anger, not letting it spill from my lips or color my expression. Power begins in silence. I repeated the words like a mantra, feeling them settle deep within me, crystallizing my resolve. This was no time for confrontation. No, the moment called for a cool, calculated restraint. Danielle's triumph was not the end. It was merely the beginning of her unraveling. I turned to the window, taking in the skyline that had always inspired my work. The city, alive with possibilities, felt like a cage I had built with my own hands. I would not lash out. Instead, I would observe, document every misstep, Every lie she spun around her growing reputation. My revenge wouldn't be a cry of fury, but a whisper that would shake the foundations of her deceit. Days turned into weeks, and I fell into a rhythm of meticulous documentation. I watched her weave her webs, gathering evidence like marbles rolling into a pot. We shared meetings, exchanged glances, but I was no longer the same quiet architect, wrestling with disbelief. I became a sentinel, patiently collecting fragments of her ambition, emails, feedback forms, a timeline that painted a picture of her rise founded on my fall. I felt something shift within me. Each new piece of evidence converted pain into laser-like focus, my identity morphing from victim to architect. I crafted a portfolio of my original work, time-stamped, irrefutable. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a blueprint for justice, detailed and poised, waiting for the right moment to pierce the silence. As the moon hung high in the sky, illuminating my drafting table late into the night, I forced myself to stay in the shadows. I had become proficient at night. The chaos of my emotions settled into a calm. Waiting was not weakness. It was a strategy, a slow tightening of the noose around my rival's self-created pedestal. Patience became my sharpest blade. I pored over my plans, working late after the world had gone to sleep. Each late night honed my designs closer to perfection, each cup of coffee exuding not just caffeine but resolve. This was not merely a return to creation, but a quiet revolution. I would pitch to a developer known for bold designs and innovative visions, the very arena where Danielle had carved herself a name using my sweat. I smirked at the irony. The same style she had stolen, now perfected by my hands. It was a calculated risk, but I could smell the stirring winds of change. I wasn't seeking her downfall. I craved my name back in the light, unencumbered by her shadow. As I prepared for that meeting, I was not consumed by revenge. I became its master. The pieces were set. Silence wrapped around me, a cocoon from which I would emerge, not as a specter lurking in the background, but as a force of nature, cold, poised, and very much alive. The ache of humiliation dulled, replaced by something sharper, more focused. I had begun my meticulous cataloging, documenting every interaction, every smirk, every misstep of Danielle's, my once trusted colleague. No longer did I bemoan my fate or mourn what had been stolen. Instead, I stood in the shadowy corners of our design firm, invisible, observing with a quiet resolve as she allowed ambition to blind her better judgment. Weeks wore on, dragging like molasses, yet I thrived in the stillness. I discarded the need for explanations. I no longer argued with my own grief. I was the quiet man, the shadow that breathed life and dread into her ambitions. Each day, I collected more than just references and documents. I gathered pieces of Danielle's constructed success, a timeline interwoven with half-truths and her risen accolades, built on the foundation of my labor. I would not confront her. That would be too reckless. Instead, I meticulously marked the corners of her empire, carving a path through her fragile constructs, indicating where the edifices of her deceit wobbled. For every triumph she paraded, I gathered proof, sentences snipped from emails, comments from clients, whispered conversations overheard in the echoing halls of our firm. I stepped carefully, like a predator amongst oblivious prey. Days blurred into nights as I toiled away in the faint glow of a desk lamp, my sanctuary beneath the endless stretch of darkness. The walls of my workspace enveloped me in a hush, a cocoon built for drafting my next move with the precision of an architect. My designs, fueled by the rage simmering beneath the surface, began to emerge as new creations, echoing the very essence of what Danielle had stolen, only perfected. Around me, colleagues rushed like waves crashing against a shore, oblivious to my silent cultivation. They saw only Danielle, her flamboyant confidence shining bright as she adeptly navigated the world I had once dominated. But I was the tide, rising slowly yet inexorably, waiting for the right moment to retake control without a sound. Those I had once considered friends became contacts, unbeknownst allies in my quiet ascent. I reinvigorated my network of developers and suppliers, craftsmen who respected the craft rather than the chaos of showmanship. Each conversation unfolded with intention, my inquiries tastefully veiled, building intrigue without revealing my hand. The whispers grew louder in my head until they became a steady rhythm. Wait, observe, execute. Patience was my sharpest blade, and I had no intention of dulling it with reckless actions. I envisioned presenting my new design, not as a specter of the past, but as a shining beacon of innovation. A stealthy entry back into the limelight, under the guise of anonymity, detonating the foundations of Danielle's ill-gotten fame. There was power in this silence, a mastery in my restraint. As I prepared to make my move, I embraced that stillness, knowing that true strength thrives when it remains undiscovered. Let Danielle bask in her glow, unaware of the shadow silently clawing at her bright facade. In the end, it would not be my fury that unfurled her deception, but my calculated indifference. The quiet man in the room, refined, poised, and concealed, would emerge unscathed, ready to reclaim the spotlight that had always belonged to me. The weight of my meticulous planning began to bear fruit, each carefully placed step echoing in the corridors of my mind. I watched Danielle's ascent with the detachment of a spectator, though I too was pulling strings behind the scenes. She glided through the office, confidence emanating, a queen presiding over her throne of stolen accolades. I let her bask in that glory, knowing the foundation beneath her feet was nothing but sand. In my quiet corner, I galvanized my resolve. Weeks of silent documentation had birthed a portfolio that shimmered with the originality she had dismissed. Every project, every shot of ingenuity I had crafted, was now a counterpoint to the hollow victories she celebrated. I had transformed pain into precision, assembling irrefutable evidence of her deceit. I entered data points into my timeline with the same care I applied to architectural details, each entry deliberate and exact. This was my blueprint, an intricate plan that would lay bare the truth of her rise. The other architects at the firm remained oblivious, distracted by her bluster. Yet, I listened. Conversations spilled from people's lips, unknowingly feeding my strategy. Whispers about projects, clients, and contracts became a symphony of information. Conversations that previously soared above my head now circulated like leaves caught in a current, each one fueling my hidden motives. I orchestrated my movements with indifference, a casual smile here, a measured nod there. I wasn't angry, I was calm and collected, plotting the demise of her facade in silence. Quietly, I reached out to those with influence. Networking became an art form as I navigated through unfamiliar circles with practiced ease. My inquiries were cloaked in pastoral sincerity, each gathering stacking the deck just a little more in my favor. Slowly, dominoes fell, unnoticed in the quiet bustle of our office. Colleagues who once held Danielle's praises now casually dropped comments hinting at discrepancies in her projects. I feigned ignorance, a disinterested observer in my own play. they'd draw their own conclusions. An unreturned email, a missed deadline, a client looking elsewhere. None suspected the ghost among them. And then there was the pitch. The opportunity for my designs to emerge, stripped of her taint, cloaked in my anonymity. I pitched to a renowned developer known for appreciating true artistry over ostentation. The same aesthetic I once shared with Danielle, only now it would blossom in a way that was entirely my own. I felt the adrenaline course through me in perfect harmony with the flickering shadows around my desk. The moment was ripe, and I knew it was my time to shine. As I prepared my submissions, the vibrant sketches, the blueprints, everything I had painstakingly rendered, twinkled with promise. I was no longer the invisible man lurking in shadows. I had transformed into an architect of my fate. Danielle clashed with walls built on borrowed dreams. I erected towers from my vision. Then it happened. A spark of hope ignited in the indigo twilight. A text message from the developer surfaced, illuminating the path I had paved with careful steps. Your designs have caught our attention. I tucked the phone away, letting the weight of the moment settle in. This was not just a fleeting chance. It was the precursor to a revelation. I was ready to emerge, to reclaim the honor and recognition that had been swindled from me. The realization settled deep within me like a heavy stone. A smirk crept onto my lips, unbidden yet inevitable. Soon, the world would see the truth, a truth I had orchestrated from the shadows, hidden vastly in plain sight. Let them applaud her now. The ground beneath was shifting, quietly, steadily. The tremors would only grow stronger, until one day her bluster would crumble, and the applause that once echoed for her would fade into an uncertain silence. And then, when everything unwound, I would be waiting. The clock's hands ticked toward midnight, each second echoing in the stillness of my office like the sound of a predator's heartbeat. In the quiet solitude, I immersed myself deeper into the fabric of my plans, meticulously weaving a tapestry of strategy that would soon envelop Danielle in something far more suffocating than her arrogance. The ache of betrayal had settled into a cold resolve, and my nightly rituals transformed. No longer just tasks of retribution, but sacred rites, sacred moments where the world faded away, leaving only me and the canvas of my revenge. Each piece of evidence I had collected glittered like shards of glass in the dim light, reflecting Danielle's myriad of missteps. Concealed behind a mask of civility at the firm, I had observed her masquerade. Each client's compliment, each nod of approval. None were aware of the shaky foundations beneath her empire. Yet I was not merely an observer. I was the architect preparing to strike. I felt the weight of my quiet dominance, a force stirring beneath the surface, waiting to rupture her facade when the moment was just right. On this particular night, I leaned back in my chair, fingertips brushing over the schematics of my latest project, my secret creation. The late hour brought with it an intoxicating clarity. I envisioned every detail of the forthcoming pitch. This was not just a design, but a mirror of my experience. Everything Danielle had presented, but not truly created. I had taken the echoes of her deception and sculpted them into something new, yet unmistakably resonant. The very essence of my work, now refined and reimagined, would soon emerge. As I prepared for the presentation, the tension in the backgrounds of our shared workspace began to churn beneath the surface, rippling through the air, a sardonic chaos building beneath Danielle's composed demeanor. I watched her during meetings, her animated gestures, the way she flicked her hair back as if to solidify her reign, unaware of the shadows that encircled her. The others laughed at her quips, applauded her ideas, all the while oblivious to the tempest brewing in the shadows. Her confidence, once an energizing force, now felt like a fraying string dangling precariously over a pit. The whispers were growing louder, discontent simmering as colleagues began to compare projects, who truly initiated ideas, who led discussions. I watched them drift toward the cracks in her reputation, like fish darting toward the scent of blood. She wouldn't see it coming. She never did. In those moments, with eyes ever watchful, I became the architect of her unraveling, a puppeteer awaiting the right pull on the strings. I calculated when to let slip a question here, a hint of doubt there, echoing through the company grapevine. Hadn't her designs fallen behind on deadlines? Wasn't that last client's feedback less than glowing? The shift in climate was subtle. It was a final illusion of safety before the cold punch of truth. Patience had transformed me. I was no longer swept along in the currents of doubt and disbelief. I had become the storm itself, biding my time. The night deepened, shadows wrapping around me like a cloak, my resolve hardening further with each design I sketched. I envisioned a table full of influential developers, their eyes lighting up at my creation, the familiar thrill cascading through me as I prepared for their applause. It would be a sweeter sound than any Danielle had claimed as her own. And as the days slipped by, I felt the landscape of our interaction shift. Her laughter carried a note of unwitting anxiety now, and the tremor only hinted at what lay beneath. I thrived in my quiet confidence, the tension between us becoming more palpable with each passing day. I had set my trap beautifully. She was ensnared without knowing it. A moth, drawn to a flame, oblivious to the danger that flickered ever closer as I circled. This wasn't merely about vengeance. It was about recognition. With focus sharpened like a blade, I would walk into that light. Not to destroy her, but to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I could feel the pulse of anticipation, that knowing ache coursing through me. Soon, they would all see her for who she really was, and in the aftermath, my name would rise as the true beacon of innovation, the very empire she had tried to claim for herself. The stage was set, my patience rewardingly sharp, and dusk was descending upon her fabricated kingdom. All I had to do was wait just a little longer. In silence, I savored the sweetness of victory and the clarity it brought, knowing she remained blissfully unaware of the shadow she cast, one that'd soon consume her brilliance, revealing the emptiness inside. And when the time came, when the curtain lifted, I would be there, a humble creator emerging anew, standing on the ruins of what once was. The ticking of the clock morphed into a metronome of anxiety, each tick resounding in the stillness of my office. The rhythms of my life had felt so perfect, every detail carefully plotted, each day an echo of my intention. But uncertainty licked at the edges of my mind. I had immersed myself in shadows, each design crafted with meticulous care, yet a persistent unease nestled in my gut. The glow of my drafting table illuminated my latest project, an evolution of everything I had lost, now alive in my hands. I had honed it down to perfection, a melody crafted in silence, ready to reclaim my rightful space in the world. But just as I marshaled my plans towards that pitch, the moment I'd been waiting for, I received a call that sent ripples through my composure. "Michael, I saw something." The voice on the line was familiar, a colleague whose casual air belied the tension between us. Greg caught sight of me often, oblivious to the war raging in the shadows. Yet here he was, bringing news that felt like a silent alarm. "I think Danielle is onto you. She's been asking questions." Frustration twisted tight in my chest. I stilled my breath, letting the coolness of control wash over me. I had anticipated this day might come. Fear trickled under my skin like an unwelcome guest. My carefully curated life felt suddenly precarious, the walls I had built seeming to wobble under scrutiny. "Questions?" I managed, keeping my voice clipped. "What kind of questions?" "Nothing specific, just, you've been emerging a lot in discussions, and she's curious about who you're working with now." A pause lingered, heavy and unwelcome. "Just keep your head down, all right?" The gravity of the situation settled on my shoulders, pressuring me all over again. Greg's warning was a reminder that shadows could dissipate, no matter how carefully scrutinized. I had worked too hard, engineered my path with too much precision to let some idle curiosity unravel it now. The risk stirred beneath my skin, prompting a reflex, not fear, but recalibration. I took a moment, focusing on my breathing, letting the silence of my room fill the space between thoughts. This was my pivot point. I would not flinch or stumble. My gaze fell onto the drafts before me, each stroke a testament to my solitude, each line a whisper of the light I sought to reclaim. I closed my eyes and envisioned the outcomes. How I would present my work, how I'd draw the eyes of developers away from Danielle's hollow claims. But now I needed a countermeasure, a layer of protection woven into my approach. If she was watching, I would shift my project's narrative in subtle ways. Different materials, bolder colors, an evolution that would speak to my authenticity while masking my moves. I could adapt, not with force, but with finesse. In the shadows, I became a ghost, a shadow surging slowly back into the light. The clock continued its relentless countdown, but I no longer squirmed beneath its gaze. I was the predator, and she, unknowingly, her own prey. I leaned closer to my sketches, pinning my focus to how I could twist this unexpected complication to my advantage. Would she still pursue the threads of my network if I reframed my direction, took a detour to unexpected beginnings? With steady resolve, I dove back into my work, carving new pathways into the designs I had already sculpted. The whispers of her probing questions lingered in the back of my mind, but they transformed into fuel, igniting a fiery need to outmaneuver her in every way. I was not trapped, nor would I be. I would emerge from the darkness, sharper than before, like an edge refined against stone. My mind recalibrated, filled with tactical excellence, stripping away the unnecessary fray. In that solitude, I sensed my resolve hardening. Every line I drew was not just a representation of my displacement, but a weapon in a calculated campaign. I had no time for fear. I only needed focus. This was a game, a long game, each piece in its proper place, waiting for the final move to be played. Danielle wouldn't just fall. She would unravel as the foundation of her deception slipped beneath her. My patience would be my greatest virtue. I would remain anonymous, the architect hidden in the wings, one step ahead, not just waiting for my moment, but crafting it, breathing life into shadows until they exploded into brilliance. Silence filled the room once more, wrapping me in a shroud of calm awareness. I tightened my grip on my pen, transforming my designs with fresh strokes of defiance. In the heart of obscurity, I would find my triumph. The architecture conference unfolded like any other. a buzz of expectation humming within the walls. Yet for me, it was the moment, a culmination of quiet plotting, the reawakening of my ambition, and a stage set for revelation. Standing just outside the grand hall, I watched as Danielle glided in, her confident demeanor creating a buzz that made her the center of attention. To her, this was just another accolade, another step on an unbroken path of success. Blind to the cracks forming beneath her feet, I took a measured breath, feeling the familiar chill of anticipation simmer beneath my surface. Tonight would be different. The moment I had meticulously created in silence, layered in patience and hidden in shadows, was finally here. I had submitted my designs under a pseudonym, a safe distance from her reach, but the spark of my identity would soon ignite the stage. I was no longer the ghost haunting the drafting room. I had transformed into a force, invisible yet potent. As I navigated the fringes of the gathering crowd, the sea of faces blurred in my periphery. The awards ceremony approached, each name announced bound to a collective gasp and applause that echoed louder than the last, an orchestration of recognition that belonged to me alone. The presenters, oblivious to the significance of the work displayed before them, offered accolades to those whose hands had stolen my labor. And there was Danielle, basking in the glow of her fabricated triumphs. She stood before the audience, rotating like a star in orbit, her shine a stark contrast to the shadows I had woven around her. I watched as she accepted the invitation to speak, a taste of arrogance lacing her voice. It was excruciatingly beautiful, her brash confidence a shroud, shielding her from the storm brewing just out of sight. A silence enveloped me, an absorbing stillness that echoed louder than any raucous applause. I wouldn't indulge in bitterness. Instead, I remained at the edge, focused and calculating, hearing her fine words punctuated by bursts of laughter. All the while, I clung to my pen, crafting an invisible architecture of fate, with each line on my pad reminiscent of my own narrative now rigid and poised. Then, the moment arrived, the name. And the award for Best Design goes to... The host's voice crackled through the amplifiers, and every ear in attendance leaned in with rapt attention. I felt my heartbeat synchronizing with the pulse of the crowd, the energy of expectation coiling tightly around my chest. M.J. Styles. It was my cloak of anonymity, my hidden name finally revealed to the world. A ripple surged through the audience, confusion sprouting almost instantaneously. That was the moment I had awaited. I watched the tide turn, the once eager eyes of my colleagues shifting from Danielle to the name that held no familiarity. The quiet of my return slowly morphed into whispers of intrigue. Danielle's smile faltered, a fleeting flicker of annoyance scrawled across her features. Gone was the certainty of her dominion. Now it lay in question, flickering like a candle caught in a sudden breeze. She stammered in surprise, attempting to recalibrate her narrative, to rid herself of the 3,000-pound gorilla of uncertainty infiltrating the script she had meticulously crafted. As applause erupted, I took a step toward the spotlight, knowing the crescendo of public recognition was now mine alone. I had no need for gloating. The thrill radiated from just being there. The intricate designs exposed not through revenge, but in clear light. I watched as her built empire wobbled before me, each cheer unraveling the fabric of lies she had woven. In that moment, clarity crystallized. No longer was I seeking her downfall. I was lifting the shroud of her deception. The audience that once only recognized her began to see through the veil. Her achievements, so carefully touted, stood starkly against the backdrop of my evidence, each dull thud a reminder of the truth that had surfaced. I smiled quietly to myself, the power of having no need to gloat washing over me. This game was never about vengeance, but about mastery. As I watched her struggle to recalibrate amidst the rising questions among her peers, my heart swelled, not out of malice, but from the pure thrill of reclamation. Every piece of evidence I had gathered whispered back to me, echoes of silence transformed into a reverberating voice, no longer just mine, but a chorus of those she had deceived. My revenge was not a tempest of chaos, but a mastery of revelation. I stood firm, the reins of recognition sliding back into my hands, waiting to lead the dance as the audience began to adjust their gaze. This stage, bright and unforgiving, was finally too brilliant for her to lie upon. In the end, I was no longer the quiet architect resigned to obscurity. I was the ghost that metamorphosed into light, invincible, resilient, and prepared to reclaim everything that was always rightfully mine. The architecture conference buzzed around me like a gathering storm, each drip of anticipation echoing in the back of my mind. I stood at the periphery, a mere figure blending into the chaotic backdrop of enthusiasm and chatter. The lights overhead bore down like the sun rising too high, rendering illusions tangible. Yet I felt far removed. Danielle floated through the crowd, adorned in her carefully curated confidence, the center of attention. Her laughter rang clear, yet there was an unsettling undercurrent, a tremor that whispered of uncertainty. I remained an unseen observer, a predator waiting patiently. My heart thrummed like a rapid tide, churning in sync with the electric atmosphere as I prepared for the unveiling. "May I have your attention?" The room quieted, the collective curiosity shifting toward the stage. It was a formulaic moment, yet it carried the potential for transformation. I knew my time would soon arrive, the crescendo of my quiet revenge poised to erupt. The host's voice sliced through the tension. "And the award for best design goes to..." Each syllable clung to the air like moisture before a storm, pregnant with expectation. "M.J. Styles." Shock thundered through the audience, rippling across faces turned toward me. It felt like fate's hand had suddenly beckoned. The confusion was palpable, transforming into intrigue as they sought to reconnect the threads of my identity. I was no longer the quiet architect shrouded in anonymity, but the familiar ghost who had emerged to claim what was rightfully mine. Danielle's expression shifted, a fleeting disarray, the confidence evaporating like mist. Gone was the triumph she wore like armor. Now, doubt marred her facade. I caught the flicker of her realization as she murmured my name, seeking to anchor herself in a suddenly shifting landscape. The air tremored. In that moment of revelation, I stepped toward the spotlight, feeling the energy pulse through me like a current seeking release. I wasn't there to gloat, but to unveil the truth buried beneath her accolades. The applause that ensued was a flurry, swirling around me like a storm, unruly yet exquisite. Each clap felt like an echo of justice as the audience began to piece together a narrative they never relinquished. "Wait," they seemed to whisper, the winds of realization swirling through the hall. "This isn't the full story." I stood there, watching as Danielle stammered, her words faltering into an incoherent mess as my designs towered above her illusions. "Wasn't this mine?" someone dared to ask. Questions unleashed like arrows aimed at her, pinpointing the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. I watched with an almost predatory delight. In a single moment, her image as the architect of grandeur was nestled against the tide of growing doubt. She was no longer the queen of a fabricated kingdom. She was merely a player exposed on this grand stage. There was beauty in that fractured silence, a privilege reserved for the patient observer. The storm I had nurtured for so long was at hand, and its winds now bent toward her. It wasn't merely about taking her down. It was about restoring balance, a recalibration of recognition that had been stolen from both my designs and my integrity. As her accolades began to unravel under scrutiny, I sensed the tides shifting irrevocably. My plan had worked. Chaos would ensue. I was the artist revealing the flaws in her masterpiece, each hesitation in her voice a testament to the culmination of my quiet revenge. I remained calm, unyielding, poised for the unveiling, while she floundered back toward the significance of her stolen triumphs. She responded defensively, scrambling in a sea of murmurs. But no armor would shield her from this storm. The audience had begun to see through the fog that had clouded their vision, unraveling the threads of disdain she had woven around herself. I would let the truth cascade over her, wash away her artifice like a tide reclaiming the shore. I felt like a coiled snake, wrapped in silence, waiting for her next misstep. This was the moment of my resurgence. I had quietly gained back the respect once lost, but this wasn't about simple revenge. It was about transcendence. And now, as the waves of acknowledgement lapped at my heels, I stood on the precipice of my own redemption. Humbled by circumstance, she would begin to understand this was not merely a competition. I had risen in the shadows, and her downfall, though inevitable, was not my doing, but simply the light exposing the cracks already forming in her grand deception. The scales had begun to balance, and the storm was not mine to contain, but hers to endure. With each heartbeat, I savored the anticipation, the taste of recognition thickening the air. Very soon, I would stand not just restored, but celebrated. The spotlight would shine unwavering on my name, my identity, truthfully acknowledged once more. I stood at the threshold of the grand hall, a mere specter enveloped by the swirling chaos of the architecture conference. The air hummed with expectant energy, but there was an unsettling tranquility within me, a calmness that felt like the eye of a storm. I watched as Danielle floated through the throng, her laughter punctuating the noise, a clear bell amidst the clamor. She was oblivious, draped in her shine, the cursor of a game where each of her moves had been carefully calculated. But tonight was different. Tonight was mine. The spotlight loomed ahead, bright and unforgiving, yet it was the very illumination I had orchestrated from the shadows. I had set the stage with quiet precision, weaving my web around her ostentatious triumphs. With each passing minute, the clock inched closer to the moment of recognition I had recalibrated to reclaim. "May I have your attention?" The host's voice cut through the buzz like a blade, delivering a silence that rang hollow with anticipation. Each heartbeat echoed against the walls as I felt the world around me recede, leaving only the heartbeat of fate, steady, relentless, poised on the edge of revelation. And the award for best design goes to... Each syllable carried with it the weight of expectation, the fabric of truth that had been meticulously woven into the narrative. M.J. Styles. A wave of shock rippled through the audience, and I reveled in the moment with cold clarity. I stepped forward not with the burden of vengeance, but with the triumph of truth unfurling. In that instant, the air thickened, Confusion washed over familiar faces, transforming curiosity into disbelief. My name, yielding its power from anonymity, transformed into a lightning rod of intrigue and recognition, sparking the first flicker of chaos in Danielle's sure-footed facade. I noticed her smile falter, that glimmer of confidence wavering like a candle caught in a gust of wind. The jagged edges of her certainty began to reveal themselves, exposing the cracks that had lain hidden beneath layers of borrowed acclaim. She stammered, her voice barely a whisper against the thrum of the audience. The moment was glimmering, electric, a culmination of my patient plotting. As the applause enveloped me, a cacophony that felt like vindication, I allowed the truth of the situation to wash over me. I had no desire to gloat, but simply to bask in the magnificence of clarity. The fabric of her constructed glory was beginning to unravel, thread by thread, as questions began weaving through the crowd. Wait, was this not hers? The whispers gained momentum, cascading like a rising tide, eroding her solid ground. Danielle scrambled. I could see the panic rising like the tide, the way she flinched under scrutiny, the very embodiment of someone caught within their vulnerable truth. The storm I had nurtured was no longer just within the shadowed confines of my mind. It was manifesting here, now, in this hall of witnesses whose perceptions twisted and shifted, reframing every accolade she had feigned. I stood firm, anchored in the knowledge that justice would reign supreme, not through vengeance, but through revelation. Each moment felt like an anchored breath before the flood, a stillness before everything broke apart. I was not the architect of her demise, but the curator of the truth, ready to release the binds that had once held me captive. "I'm just getting started," I whispered beneath the clamor of applause, not as a threat, but as a declaration. In the distance, I could see my colleagues wrestle with the realization of what they had overlooked for far too long. Their eyes shifted. The realization crystallized in the gathering darkness that surrounded Danielle. I felt the final pieces of the trap clicking into place, each heartbeat synchronizing with the anticipation surrounding me. The calm laid claim to my thoughts, sharpening my focus. No fear, no hesitation, only that exhilarating sensation of control. I had waited long enough, silently biding my time against the storm, and now it would culminate in this moment. Danielle's grand symphony was transforming into a hollow echo, and I would remain in the shadows, unmoved, ready to lay claim to what was rightfully mine. I steeled myself, ready to walk into the blaze of the spotlight, ready to shift the narrative, to reclaim my identity without the need for fanfare. The quiet, assured architect, finally emerging from the fog of silence. Everything I had created would rise, unencumbered by her deceit, and as her masterpieces collapsed under the weight of their own falsehoods, I would revel in the knowledge that her illusion had eclipsed the truth for far too long. She had cast me aside, but now the very foundation of her success would settle like dust around her. Dust that would be swept away by the winds of acknowledgement, revealing the story I had always intended to tell. I would stand, proud and resolute, as my mastery returned to the light, ready for the world to witness each breath of my triumph. And as the reality began to crystallize around me, my name rising, her facade crumbling, I found comfort in knowing what came next would not be about revenge, but reclamation. A new dawn was breaking, and I was ready to step into the light. The hall pulsed with energy, an electric current arcing through the air, fluttering against the skin like an unrelenting tide. My heart thudded loudly, but I clung to the stillness within. I observed the waves of bodies buzzing in expectation, the crowd a shimmering fabric of ambition and accolades, where applause suffocated the silence of truth. Danielle stood at the center of it all, her laughter bright and hollow. She wore her confidence like armor, unaware of the quiet storm swirling in the hidden corners. I was but a shadow, an architect of unspoken truths, waiting for the moment that would shatter her carefully constructed illusion. "May I have your attention?" The host's voice rang out, slicing through the clamor. This was it, the herald of my reclamation. I felt the curious eyes of the audience turn towards the stage, their collective breath held in anticipation, the tension taut like a high wire. "And the award for best design goes to..." The words lingered in the air, heavy with promise. I leaned forward, feeling my skin prickle with anticipation. MJ Styles. A shockwave rippled through the room, a collective gasp, then silence. It was the sound of stones dropping into still water, widening circles of confusion that would soon swallow her whole. I stepped into the light, feeling its heat wash over me, embracing what I had orchestrated from the shadows. Danielle's facade cracked in real time, the laughter etched on her face fractured, distortion spreading like a powerful wave eroding a sandy shore. I caught the flicker of disbelief in her eyes as recognition pooled among the attendees. Hot whispers ignited the air. "Who is MJ Styles?" An eager gust of questions surrounded her, and I reveled in it. This was not a spectacle born of chaos. It was a quiet revelation. She stammered, grasping at straws of her identity as the applause cascaded around me like a heavy blanket. Each clap a declaration of my meticulous rise from the ashes of my own demise. Her certainty melted before me, revealing the deep chasms beneath the polished surface of her achievements. Each query aimed at her struck harder than any sword. I had come to reclaim my honor, not to destroy hers. "Wasn't this designed by Michael Renner?" Someone posed, the words shooting into the air like arrows, piercing the heart of her illusion. "I thought..." The voice faded, smothered beneath the uncertainty swarming around her. I watched the walls she had built tremble, every salute of approval for her collapsing into dust. My pulse surged with satisfaction, not from vindictiveness, but from the cold clarity of reclamation. I was no longer trapped within the confines of shadow. I had emerged as the architect wielding truth like a weapon. Danielle scrabbled, realizes that her carefully curated empire was crumbling, her stammering a desperate attempt to regain her composure, each misstep choreographed in real time. The laughter I once endured began to turn sour, thickening with questions that floated towards her like hungry vultures circling a wounded animal. I felt the air fill with the sweet aroma of justice manifesting, not as retribution, but as restoration. Justice had been patient, and it was now ready to claim its own. In that moment, silence enveloped me. I would remain unyielding, neither gloating nor rushing to bring her down. I simply stood, my presence unmoved by her panic, focused on the groundwork I had so carefully laid. The storm I had nurtured was finally unleashed, and I took in the scene, metaphorically, a specter dispassionately observing the chaos. Each shatter of her prestige echoed like glass breaking, sharp, definitive, and revealing. As the murmurs among the crowd swelled, each conversation punctuated by disbelief, I absorbed every drop of recognition that poured forth, like rain rewarding a parched landscape. I had not sought their applause, but it was mine nonetheless, a sweet vindication for the years I had endured in silence. Each question about her integrity was not just an inquiry. It was a testament to the evidence I had so painstakingly collected, and with every whispered realization, my identity surged and burned anew. The admiration that had once been directed at her began to shift, like the tide turning beneath the pale light of dawn. They were beginning to see her for who she was, a thief shrouded in the brilliance of my designs. As the whirlwind of revelation rose around us, I felt a renewed sense of purpose well up within me. She may have taken my work, but in this moment, I was reclaiming my life. This was not merely about her downfall, it was about a return to identity, a reclamation of respect forged in the fires of betrayal. Justice rolled over the room like an unseen tidal wave, sweeping away the remnants of deceit. I was not just standing in the spotlight, I was shaping the narrative that would be told for years to come. I didn't need to raise my voice to bring her down. I merely needed the truth to surface, and I did so with a calm steadiness that radiated strength. There would be no celebration to fuel my triumph, just the quiet relief of knowing I had reclaimed my name. As uncertainty enveloped her, I stood rooted in my redemption, ready to embrace the future that had long been stolen from me. The applause continued to roll, and I soaked it all in, each clap a step toward my emergence from the shadows. I had woven my revenge not from chaos, but from the strands of clarity. I had built a new foundation that no one would dare challenge again. And as the last of her illusions crumbled before me, I turned my gaze toward the audience, my peers, my colleagues, my allies. They were witnessing the transformation that had unfurled beneath their noses, and I would no longer allow myself to be swallowed by her brilliance. I was ready to reclaim my identity, not in vengeance, but in recognition, standing tall as the architect of my own fate. Tonight was mine. The dawn was breaking, and I would step into the light, resolute. The night air was cool and crisp as I walked away from the chaos of the architecture conference, my heart still pulsing with the clarity of what had just transpired. I had stood in the glow of the spotlight, feeling the weight of my name, M.J. Styles, reverberate through the hall like a symphony playing at full volume. Every clap of applause echoed the gradual reclamation of my identity, a stark contrast to the invisibility I had once known. And yet, as the applause faded into memory, a different echo lingered, an unsettling stillness. I left that stage with my head held high, but returning home felt like stepping back into a quiet world where the tumult of success was nothing but a whisper. I found solace in the solitude of my empty apartment, the walls familiar yet strangely dissonant under the shadows of triumph. Each room was a canvas painted with old hopes and weary dreams, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, it felt like a refuge rather than a prison. My eyes drifted to the drafting table, untroubled by the ghost of my past. There, my original blueprint lay untouched, unsigned, a silent testament to ambition. I hung it on the wall, the weighty reminder of everything I had built out of betrayal. As I secured it in place, I noticed the marks, slight creases, testaments to my persistence, the strokes bold yet tempered with precision. This was a symbol not just of my designs, but of my journey. From the quiet man pushed to the fringes to the architect standing under the glare of public scrutiny. But as I stepped away from the wall, I understood that recognition and reclamation came at a cost. Yes, I had exposed the truth, had lifted the veil on the deception that had threatened to suffocate me, but I also carried with me an emotional heaviness. Trust, that fragile currency, had slipped through my fingers like grains of sand. How could I ever restore what was lost? In my quest for recognition, I had stripped away the kindness in my heart. The warmth had dulled like a fading photograph left out in the sunlight. I moved through my apartment, shutting windows and locking doors as I cleared the remnants of that evening's triumph. The stillness enveloped me, and I felt the echo of the past fold around me. Days spent in silent despair, nights spent captivated by plans of quiet revenge. I got my moment, yes, and now that I had it, I found no need to gloat. What satisfaction could come from that? My inner resolve had always been my weapon, my calm the most formidable force. I marveled at the sun setting beyond the city skyline, bathing everything in golden warmth. This was my light, the new dawn that had come after the dark storms of betrayal. As the shadows stretched and distorted across the pavement, I acknowledged the bittersweet truth that lay before me. I hadn't brought Danielle down. I simply stepped back and let her take the fall. The seduction of revenge was never the thrill of witnessing her collapse. It was the clarity I found in my own resurrection. The walk away was always harder than I anticipated. The temptation to linger, to justify my actions in the mind of the audience, hummed sweetly at the back of my mind. Yet I knew this chapter had closed, not at the cost of uproar, but with quiet dignity, the kind that resides in closure. Each footstep faded behind me as I left the conference, echoes of a life transitioned, leaving behind only memories of an ornate game played and won. The road ahead was expansive, filled with possibilities yet untapped. I turned back one last time, not with regret, but with resolve, satisfied that no matter the emotional price, I had been rebuilt stronger and wiser. And now, as I stepped out of the light and into the shadows of my future, I held a new armor made of strength and self-assertion. The battle may have been fought, but the war had only just begun. I was ready to embrace the peace and the scars that would never truly fade.